We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we bring all religiously related, biblically related, scripturally related, from the three major organized religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We strive hard to bring you the correct information, but it's not always possible. So at any time you feel, hey, that's not correct, better check your sources. Let us know what you're actually pointing at. Give us a link to better sources and we'll check those out. And then if we come to realize, oh yeah, okay, our information is actually wrong, this one is actually more accurate because, and we'll give a specific reason, we will accredit you or give you credit for bringing it to our attention nicely, maturely. We try to keep to our policy. Honesty is the best policy. Okay, but we make mistakes because information online may not necessarily be accurate. Okay, it may have that mirage that it is because it's from an expert, renowned expert, qualified expert, etc. But there's usually someone else that will debunk it because they can. Okay, and say, well, that's not right because, so look at their one, and then we may post that information up and someone says, you said, and it's actually incorrect. Better check your sources. So, yeah, it's not so much us because we're getting it from that source. So you have to do the homework and try to find it again and again. Yeah, but we can't give perfect information 100%. Okay, from a perfect being. If you can do that, or let us know in the comments down below. Give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add that comment in the comment sections below, and get back to you on that as soon as possible. And then go share this video with all your family, friends and others if you really liked it, if it inspired you, opened your eyes to this or that, and tell everybody, hey, look at this video, it's really, really interesting. Okay, this is the banned Book of Mary, how her story was suppressed by the church and hidden in art for centuries, by Ronald F. Hock. Introduction. Mary in the New Testament, Infancy Gospel of James, and so forth. Introduction. In Cologne, a pastoral lakeside village on the outskirts of Geneva, Switzerland, stands the Bodmer Library and Museum, a favourite haunt of scholars and tourists alike. As you stand in its hushed, lofty central atrium, you find yourself surrounded by 2-story high tiers of shelves containing one of the world's finest private collections of rare books and documents, more than 160,000 in all. You can sense the power of the written word radiating from illuminated medieval manuscripts, a first edition Gutenberg Bible, handwritten texts of Homer's Odyssey, Dante's Divine Comedy, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and Grimm's Fairy Tales, and first editions of Cervantes' Don Quixote and Shakespeare's comedies, essays by Sir Isaac Newton, and the notebooks of Albert Einstein. Among the most remarkable of the library's holdings are 22 ancient Christian manuscripts known as the Bodmer Papyri. The library's founder, the late Martin Bodmer, discovered them during the 1950s, not in an archaeological dig, but among the antiquities dealers who inhabit the shadowy world where such objects find their way from the hands of looters and tomb raiders to the curators of the world's great museums. Experts believe that most of the Bodmer Papyri came from a small library maintained by monks at Fort Keepley, said to be the world's oldest Christian monastery, near the Egyptian city of Dishna. The keepers of sacred books sealed them in jars and hid them. Perhaps, as most present-day experts say, they had to save these secret papers from Arab invaders. Or, as some modern scholars speculate, the idea may have been to give worn documents a decent burial after new copies had been made. Preserved by the bone-dry desert climate, the papyri lay concealed for some 1500 years before local peasants unearthed them in the mid-20th century. As a sightseer, you can only see photocopies of sections of these papyri. If you can persuade the library administrators that you have a compelling reason to examine the originals, you will find them in a climate-controlled room under the watchful eyes of Swiss security guards. Among the Bodmer Library's papyri is the oldest known copy of the Gospel of Luke, dating to around 200 AD, and one of the Gospel of John, also from around 200. Among these papyri are also copies of the letters of James, Peter, John, and Jude. The most enigmatic document in the collection, known as Bodmer Papyrus 5, is not part of the biblical canon, though perhaps it should have been. It bears the title The Birth of Mary, Revelation of James. It is the oldest known copy and one of the most complete of a book referred to by modern scholars as the Proto-Evangelium Jacobi, or translated into English, the Infancy Gospel of James. Like all papyri, this one was made from a type of reed that the Egyptians cultivated along the banks of the Nile River, and of late we have found that it's actually called flax. It's known as flax. We have that abundantly in our country here. It's an old customary plant that was used to make baskets to put in earth oven food and other items. Skilled artisans would slice the pith of the reed in long wafer thin strips, which they would lay vertically side by side on a damp surface. Then they would lay another layer of strips horizontally across the first and pound them with a hammer until they adhere together. Polished with pumice, sheets or scrolls of papyrus made writing paper that was prized throughout the ancient world for its durability, and a remarkable number of papyrus documents have survived to this present era. Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, painting. The Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, Louvre, Paris. Saint Anne, Mary's mother, appears nowhere in the Bible, yet she was easily recognizable to Leonardo da Vinci and his contemporaries because they were familiar with the stories of Mary's life that originated in the 2nd century Infancy Gospel of James. Not surprisingly, Bodmer Papyrus 5 is faded along the edges. Its originally white surface has darkened to a cinnamon colour, and the ink, made from lamp black dissolved in papyrus juice, has faded with age. The writing surface is covered almost edge to edge with Greek capital letters, written as was the custom of the time, without space between words. This document is the source of almost all the details we believe we know about the life of Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. It also sets forth an account of the birth of Jesus that is much different from the Christmas story accepted around the world today. Written about around 150 AD by an unknown Christian, it was widely known in many parts of the early Christian world, yet few people today have ever heard of it. The Legend of Mary. While the New Testament focuses on Mary and Joseph in the context of the birth of Jesus, the Infancy Gospel of James begins years earlier by describing the plight of an elderly couple named Joachim and Anne. Though prosperous and prominent, they are childless, a condition not acceptable to the society of their time. In fact, Joachim, alone of all the good people in Israel, has no children. And here's a painting by Giotto di Bondone, 1266 to 1336. The Dream of Joachim, Scrovinghi Chapel, Padua. In a series of frescoes, the Renaissance master Giotto di Bondone illustrated episodes from the life of Mary, all drawn from later adaptations of the banned Infancy Gospel of James. Here, a messenger of God tells Mary's father Joachim that his wife will bear a child. After Joachim is publicly chastised for his lack of offspring and his offerings to God are rejected by the priests, he decides to retreat into the wilderness to fast and pray in the hope that God will tell him why he is childless. His wife Anne is similarly blamed by her own slave for being barren. Stricken with sorrow, she sits in her garden only to be further reminded of her barrenness by the fruitfulness of everything around her. An angel hears Anne's lament and informs her that she will bear a child who will be known throughout the world. In the desert, Joachim is likewise told that his prayers have been heard. Overcome with joy, Anne vows to dedicate her child to God, and Joachim rushes from the desert to be reunited with his wife. The child, of course, is Mary. Well, we actually read in the New Testament that Joachim was holding a service within a building, something along those lines, and the people who were obviously that could come in, they were left outside lighting incense and candles, something like that. And then he was in there, and he saw this strange being, gave him a fright, and he realised who it was, an angel, messenger. And this messenger told him, your wife shall have a child. And he says, oh, how can that be, because I'm old, past it, and she's past it as well, that's impossible. And then apparently, because of his disbelief, he was turned blind, and he went outside and said, oh look, he's blind, must have had a vision or something like that. And then these were his days off, or his week off or something, so he went home and impregnated his wife apparently, and because eventually 6 months to 9 months later, or 9 months I would say, she, because that's the usual, she had a child, i.e. John the Baptist. And Mary verified that she was with child when she went to visit her, and she touched her stomach and the baby inside jumped for joy, etc. Something like that. Overcome with joy, Anne vows to dedicate her child to God, and Joachim rushes from the desert to be reunited with his wife. The child, of course, is Mary. Oh, okay, so it's not John the Baptist. Okay, yeah, it's a different one, it's Anne. Okay, so this is Mary, right? She gives birth to Mary. After Mary's birth, Anne transforms the baby's bedroom into a sanctuary where nothing unclean can touch her. On the young girl's first birthday, the priest bless her. That's when she is 3. Her parents fulfill their vow by presenting Mary to the priest in the temple in Jerusalem. Sorry, I got a bit distracted there because the cat is trying to get out the window. It's too lazy to go out the other window in the kitchen. After Mary's birth, Anne transformed the baby's bedroom into a sanctuary where nothing unclean can touch her. On the young girl's first birthday, the priest bless her. Then when she is 3, her parents fulfill their vow by presenting Mary to the priest in the temple in Jerusalem. There she spends the rest of her childhood fed by the hand of an angel. It's older. It's when Mary was older. She went to visit her aunt Elizabeth, who was with child, i.e. John the Baptist, and jumped for joy, because apparently she was pregnant as well, Mary, and it jumped for joy in relation to the child in Mary's womb. None of this appears in the New Testament. Even when the Infancy Gospel begins to overlap with material in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, the only books of the Bible that describe the circumstances surrounding Jesus' birth, it tells a very different and much more detailed story. At the age of 12, Mary is about to become a woman and hence a threat to the temple's purity. Having sought divine guidance, the high priest is instructed to summon all the widowers of Israel. Each is to bring his staff. A sign will determine which of the suitors is to receive her as his wife. Among the widowers is Joseph. Okay, so he was married before. Who in this account is described as an old man with grown sons. Okay, so he's had children from his previous marriage. I wonder what happened to his wife. Maybe she died. A dove appears from the tip of Joseph's staff and perches on his head, indicating that he is the one chosen as Mary's husband. Joseph protests that he is elderly with grown children and does not wish to remarry. He relents only when the priests agree to let him take Mary as his ward, not his wife. Joseph takes Mary home, but soon his job as a carpenter calls for him to go out of town to build houses. Together with other virgins, Mary is asked by the high priest to spin thread for a new temple veil. While drawing water from a well, Mary hears a voice. Okay, this is very different from the New Testament version. She's supposed to be in her house or her home, in bed or something like that, and she hears this voice. Sees this vision. Very different. Terrified, she hurries home to her spinning. There the voice of an angel addresses her again, saying that she has found favour with God and will conceive by means of his word. In a scene very similar to the Annunciation in the New Testament, she is told that the child will be divine and that she is to call him Jesus. Funny that, because that's a Greek, an English word of the Greek Latin Iosus. Yeah. If she had her language, speaking the Galilean Aramaic or Hebrew or whatever, it definitely wouldn't have been that, would it? Mary finishes her spinning, takes her thread to the high priest, and goes to stay with her relative Elizabeth, who is herself pregnant with the child who will become John the Baptist. The details of their meeting are similar to those in the Gospel of Luke, complete with their greetings to one another and an incident in which the unborn John leaps for joy in his mother's womb. Mary returns to Joseph's house after 3 months. After 3 more months, Joseph rejoins her there. Once again, the story begins to diverge from the biblical account, adding biographical anecdotes that would inspire devotional artworks but never become part of the New Testament. On finding Mary pregnant, Joseph initially blames himself for failing to protect her. Then he rebukes Mary sharply and, despite her claims of innocence, resolves to divorce her. But that night, Joseph has a dream in which an angel tells him that Mary is pregnant by the Holy Spirit and that he is to name the child Jesus. Obedient to the angel's message, Joseph abandons his thoughts of divorce. A major crisis soon develops when a visitor realizes that Mary is pregnant and tells the high priest that Joseph has violated the virgin in his care. Summoning Joseph and Mary to answer this charge, the priest hears their denials. In a dramatic confrontation unknown to the New Testament, the priest refuses to believe them and orders Joseph to return Mary to the temple. Joseph weeps at the thought of losing her, and the high priest partially relents by sending them into the wilderness to test their honesty. When they return unharmed, the priest realizes that they are innocent and publicly exonerates the couple. From this point, James is similar in some respects to the birth stories in Matthew and Luke, but a close reading reveals many significant departures from the canonical accounts. Joseph and Mary heed Emperor Augustus's call for a census and head for Bethlehem, as in the Lucan account, or the account of Luke. But the author of the Infancy Gospel expands the narrative considerably. He adds a speech by Joseph detailing how Mary should be described for the census. There's a conversation between Joseph and Mary while they travel. Most importantly, they stop before reaching Bethlehem so that Mary can deliver her child, not in a stable but in a cave. Also included is a miraculous vision that Joseph experiences at the moment of Jesus' birth, in which time stands still. Clouds and birds are frozen in the air, and men and animals remain motionless on the ground. Where Luke tells of shepherds arriving from their fields, the Infancy Gospel has 2 midwives who visit this cave, the cave where Mary has given birth. Skeptical of the claim of one midwife that a virgin has given birth, the second midwife performs a physical examination to confirm that the child has indeed been born to a virgin. We are now wondering, is this the Gnostic rendition of the Infancy of James or the Gospel of Mary? It sounds very similar. But as she touches Mary, her hand begins to burn and she prays for help. A voice tells her to pick up the baby Jesus. When she does, her hand is healed. So why was she like fire? Well, she's so hot, this lady's hand got burnt. As Joseph, Mary and the infant Jesus are preparing to leave for Bethlehem, the Magi arrive, 3 wise men, at the cave in search of the newborn king of the Judeans. Here the Infancy Gospel's guiding star and the gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh recall the Gospel of Matthew. The Magi, as it turns out, have already informed King Herod of their search for one who has been born king of the Jews, a title held by Herod, though they have offered no clue to his whereabouts. As in the Bible, Herod's fear and rage lead him to order the murder of all male children under age 2 to ensure the removal of his royal rival. Because he was afraid, this is going to be a king, and he's going to take over, probably take over my kingdom and leave me desolate, etc., etc. No, we can't have that. I'm the king, sort of thing. Then the Infancy Gospel departs once again from the traditional story. Instead of having Jesus escape Herod's soldiers by means of Joseph leading him and Mary into Egypt, his life is saved by Mary's courage as she wraps him in swaddling cloths and hides him in a manger in Bethlehem. And a plot twist that may baffle modern readers, the Infancy Gospel drops the story of Mary, Joseph and Jesus at this point, and the closing scene deals with the appearance of John the Baptist, who is also among the infants endangered by Herod's murderous decree. Terrified, John's mother Elizabeth flees to the hills with her baby. John's father, Zechariah, who is serving at the time as a priest in the temple, this is the guy, and he goes blind or something like that for a while because he didn't believe this messenger, this angel that said your wife shall be with child. So he refuses to tell Herod's agents where his wife and child have gone. He pays for his silence with his life. So he gets killed off. The Infancy Gospel of James ends with a simple prayer. Grace will be with all those who fear the Lord. Amen. The reason for the Gospel's unusual structure, including the switch of character in the final pages, is that it followed a formal literary style called an encomium, which, along with more familiar formats such as fables, mythological tales, and essays, was taught in school courses on composition throughout the Greco-Roman world. The encomium form, according to textbooks of the time, should end by comparing the subject's virtue, in this case Mary's courage in saving the infant Jesus from Herod's assassins, with that of another well-known personage, namely the priest Zechariah's courage in protecting his own son from the same danger. Recognising the Infancy Gospel of James as an encomium tells us one important fact. This literary form was reserved especially for praising noteworthy people and was typically intended to be read aloud in public. As a book of praise, it would have been composed for celebratory occasions, or celebratory occasions. This one was most likely intended to be read during Christian worship and perhaps during a feast day. Here's a painting by Giotto di Bondone, 1266 to 1336. The Birth of Mary, Scrovegni Chapel, Padua. Since the Bible says nothing of Mary's parentage and birth, Giotto based this fresco on later adaptations of the banned Infancy Gospel of James. Since no feast dedicated to Mary is known to have been observed by Christians as early as 150 AD, the author believes it might have been written for the communion of the Lord's Supper. If so, the author had taken the commemoration of Christ's death to compose and deliver an encomium praising his mother Mary. Later, Mary came to be celebrated in feast days of her own, the Feast of the Birth of Mary, September 8, and the Feast of the Presentation in the Temple, November 21. We know that the Infancy Gospel of James was traditionally read on those days, since scribes who copied the Gospel often wrote the dates September 8 or November 21 on the manuscripts, probably in the margin or something like that. The Forgotten Book of Mary. Virtually all modern Christians accept without question the contents of the New Testament as they have been passed down through the centuries. But in the first centuries of the Christian era, the content of the Bible was not so clearly defined. By the end of the 2nd century, a generation or two after the Infancy Gospel of James was written, church scholars such as Bishop Irenaeus of Lyons and the Carthaginian priest Tertullian had defined which documents were indisputably authoritative, including the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, as well as 16 of the 23 other documents that make up the New Testament today. Many other writings were considered to be scriptural in some parts of the Christian world, and there was no general agreement about which of these works were not part of the Bible. Among these writings was the Infancy Gospel of James. This account of Mary's ancestry and her life up to the time of Jesus' birth was popular among Ebionite Jewish Christians, as well as in Greek, Syrian, Coptic and Armenian churches. The Gospel purports to have been written by a James, presumably James, the brother of Jesus, shortly after 4 BC, when King Herod died. If true, this would place the Infancy Gospel among the earliest of all the Christian writings, predating the crucifixion of Jesus by more than 30 years. The last chapters say, "Now I, James, am the one who wrote this account at the time when an uproar arose in Jerusalem at the death of Herod. I took myself to the wilderness until the uproar had died down." See page 110. Since it identifies James as one of Joseph's sons from a previous marriage, it suggests that the author was an eyewitness to many of the events it describes. Modern scholars, using the methods of historical criticism, agree that James could not have been the real author of the Infancy Gospel. It contains elements that would only make sense to readers who were already familiar with the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which were written between 80 and 90 AD, at least 20 years after James died. In fact, a primary purpose of the Infancy Gospel was to answer questions about Jesus' parentage that were not addressed by Matthew or Luke. The real author wrote in the guise of James to enhance the Infancy Gospel's credibility. It's like 13 letters of St. Paul, and apparently 6 or 7 of them were his, the others were not written by him. And that's why he, realizing this in his time, placed a key so that people that received his letters, say the 7 churches of Asia Minor, knew by this certain key or way that he wrote that these were the authentic letters of Paul. These other ones were not so much fake. It's just somebody probably called Barry or Ronnie or something. Not a very scholarly name, and no one take him seriously. Decided, well, no one's taking me seriously, so what I'll do is I'll write, pretend to be Paul. I'll write in that style, and then they'll take me seriously. And he did that, and that's what happened. But yeah, Paul said, basically stated, no, I didn't write those. And theologians like Barty Ehrman, etc., have proven that. Out of the 13, around about 7 were proven to be authentic, written by St. Paul himself, the Apostle Paul himself. The true authorship of the Infancy Gospel of James remains a mystery. All we know is that it was composed in the Greek region of the Roman Empire, sometime around 150 AD, by someone with a standard education but no exceptional writing talent. Its grace and beauty come from its subject matter, not its author's eloquence. Although some clergymen today dismiss the Infancy Gospel as a forgery, its authorship was unquestioned in earlier times and does nothing to explain why it was ultimately banned. In this sense, they may not mean banned like you can't have that in your possession, you can't read it, all that sort of stuff. Just that it wasn't included in the canon. Okay, and how dare you put it in the canon? Don't try and do that, right? They're basically saying, okay, we don't want nothing of it. Don't want to hear about it, don't want to see it. That is the Infancy Gospel of James. That the Infancy Gospel of James was widely accepted is clear from the fact that it was translated from the original Greek into at least 8 other languages, including Ethiopian, Arabic and Irish. Strangely though, after Latin became the official language of the church, it was the, what do they call that, lingua franca? Yeah, lingua franca, something like that. It's like the trendy language of the day. Everyone spoke it. Strangely though, after Latin became the official language of the church, it was not translated into that language for more than 500 years. The Forbidden Gospel. To find out why the Infancy Gospel of James was excluded from the Bible and banned by the church, the best place to start is the Library of Damascus I, who served as Pope from 366 AD until his death in 384. Pope Damascus built the first permanent structure to house the fast-growing collection of church archives. The forerunner of today's Vatican Library, he entrusted the archives to his secretary, Eusebius Sophronius Hieronymus, known today as Saint Jerome, the patron saint of librarians and translators. It was Jerome who created the Latin Vulgate Bible, the definitive version of the scriptures used by the Roman Catholic Church to the present day, by revising, unifying and translating both the Old and New Testament into the Latin idiom spoken by the residents of Rome at the time. And then Erasmus, he wanted to continue Jerome's work from where he left off. The Pope gave him this assignment in 382 AD, following the convocation of the Council of Rome, over which Damascus presided. As a result of that meeting, the Pope issued a decree naming the books that would form the canon or official contents of the Bible. Damascus' list included several writings that had not previously been accepted as scriptural, but the Infancy Gospel of James was not among them. It is easy to imagine Jerome at his work. He was a favourite subject of Renaissance painters, and oil painting done in 1521 by Albrecht Dürer, for instance, depicts the librarian as an old man with a long wavy beard and a taciturn expression, running his left hand over a human skull, symbolising the brevity of life as he pores over a document on the desk in front of him. It would have been obvious to Jerome that the thematic core of the Infancy Gospel of James was Mary's purity, conceived through divine intervention and not lust, born to a wealthy and pious parents, raised in a room as pure as a temple, and then in the temple itself, fed by angels, given to an old man who had no interest in her and who was out of town when the child was conceived, publicly exonerated by the high priest and certified by midwives as virginal even after childbirth. It's kind of weird, that one. Mary was the purest possible person. Then again, if you think about it, yeah, okay. Even after childbirth, Mary was the purest possible person God could have found to bear the Christ child. Many artworks, such as one Leonardo da Vinci painted in 1480, depict Jerome with a lion at his side, a reference to the time he spent as a hermit in the desert. According to legend, he pulled a thorn from the lion's paw, and the lion remained his loyal companion for many years. If the story was factual, the lion must have been one of Jerome's few friends. Before becoming a priest, Jerome had been a lawyer, and as one of the most influential writers of his time, he loved nothing more than arguing his own views in debates with other theologians, forcefully and sarcastically, often making vicious personal attacks against his adversaries. Thus, about a year after he was first assigned to translate the Holy Scriptures, Jerome penned a treatise called On the Perpetual Virginity of the Blessed Virgin, or Mary. It was a response to an earlier tractate by a fellow priest named Helvidius, who questioned whether Mary had remained ever virginal after Jesus' birth. Helvidius pointed to the brothers and sisters of Jesus named in Mark 6:3 and Matthew 30:55 as proof that Mary and Joseph had had a normal marriage. He backed up this interpretation by quoting Luke 2:7. Mary gave birth to her firstborn son, suggesting that other children were born to her later. And here's a painting up here by G. Otto de Bondoni, 1260-61, 1336. The Marriage of the Virgin, Scrovegni Chapel, Padua. The stories in the Infancy Gospel of James were adapted over the centuries. The Infancy Gospels tell that Joseph refused to marry Mary and instead took her as his ward, but an actual marriage, illustrated here, occurs in the 9th century book of the Birth of Mary. So he was an older man. So we have come across a Seventh-day Adventist we were talking to years and years ago. We were sitting down with him and he said, yeah, well, it's kind of strange because he believed that, or from what the research he did, that Joseph was about 44 and she was very young. Mary gave birth to her firstborn son, suggesting that other children were born to her later in Matthew 1:25. Joseph did not know Mary until she, or he had intercourse with her, until she had given birth to a son, implying that the couple did have marital relations after Jesus' birth. For Helvidius, the marriage of Mary and Joseph showed that married women were just as glorious in the eyes of God as virgins, a view with which Jerome vehemently disagreed. Jerome could easily have cited the Infancy Gospel of James as authority to support his argument, though it was not one of the documents chosen by Pope Damasus to be in the Latin Vulgate Bible. It could have been asserted as a non-canonical authority, as writings by many early Christian theologians were. It was the first gospel to proclaim Mary's virginity after the birth of Jesus. Joseph's advanced age and his decision to be Mary's legal guardian rather than her husband, as well as the findings of the midwives that Mary was still intact after Jesus' birth, would certainly have bolstered Jerome's case for perpetual virginity. And yet, Jerome did not use the Infancy Gospel as evidence because a single, seemingly insignificant detail called its accuracy into question, at least in his mind. He rejected the presence of the midwife, who exclaimed that Mary was a virgin. Jerome saw this passage as flying in the face of Luke 2:7, which says that Mary wrapped Jesus in swaddling cloths. Since this was a task normally performed by a midwife, not the mother, no midwife could have been present at the nativity. Instead, in his debate with Helvidius, Jerome fell back on his expertise as a translator, asserting that the words brothers and sisters did not always mean siblings by birth, but were also used in a number of biblical passages to indicate brothers by race, kinship or affection. When Matthew, and Luke spoke of Jesus' brothers and sisters, Jerome insisted they meant cousins. Thus, the words did not impugn Mary's perpetual virginity. Since Jerome was one of the most influential writers of his time, Helvidius' position was refuted and revealed as a heresy, and the Infancy Gospel of James was pushed aside. This rejection was the first step toward banning the Infancy Gospel. The Council of Rome, where Pope Damasus handed down his original decree, omitting the Infancy Gospel from the Bible, was local in scope, not an ecumenical council, so it was disregarded in other parts of the empire. Its decisions generally reflected Pope Damasus's personal life or personal views, which, outside Rome, were considered far from infallible. Elsewhere, the Infancy Gospel was still accepted by many as carrying significant authority. Official and explicit rejection of the Infancy Gospel of James as apocryphal, rejected by the Church, would have to wait another century. In 496 AD, Pope Gelasius I handed down a decree known as the Decretum Gaiasianum. The decree began by confirming the list of books Damasus I and Jerome had selected to make up the official biblical canon, but now added a long list of writings to be rejected, including about 24 Gospels, Acts, letters and Revelations. These writings, Gelasius said, had been recognised by heretics or schismatics and were to be avoided by Catholics. Among the banned writings, many of which are no longer known to exist in any form, was the Infancy Gospel of James, identified here as the Gospel under the name of James the Younger. Not one to mince words, Gelasius proclaimed, "We acknowledge these writings to be not merely rejected, but eliminated from the whole Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, and with their authors and the followers of their authors to be damned in the extricable shackles of anathema forever." Maybe what it says to eliminate from the whole Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, because at that time the Roman Catholic Church and the now named Nestorius Church were united for a period, but then something happened and they had a disagreement. That church didn't accept certain things that the Roman Catholics had in their doctrines, their dogmas, etc., so they made a split, and then maybe a century or so later, or later on, they didn't want anything to do with them. That's according to the research that we found on the Apostolic Church of the East. Was this decree the Book of Mary? With this decree, the Book of Mary was banned, officially at least, but it was too late. The rise of Mary. Even as church fathers were stripping the Infancy Gospel of James of its authority and ultimately condemning it as a heretical work to be wiped from the face of the earth, societal trends and historical events in other parts of the empire were exalting the importance of Mary and her perpetual chastity. Although chastity emerged as a principal value in the Roman Empire by the time of the emergence of Christianity, the suffering caused by persecution and plague made martyrdom the ultimate virtue. Paul, the author of much of the New Testament, never mentioned the virginity of Jesus' mother, nor did Mark or John. Accounts of the Immaculate Conception and Virgin Birth in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke may have been included less from any great regard for chastity than to show that Christ was the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy of Isaiah 7:14. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, meaning God is with us. Matthew himself said as much, Matthew 1:23. But by the time the Infancy Gospel of James was written, self-control or purity, a Greek ideal since the time of Socrates, was already becoming recognized by Christians as a highly valued human attainment. This virtue included control of the tongue, the belly, and as the Greeks put it, the things below the belly. Purity was glorified in 2nd century Greek philosophical treatises, rhetorical speeches, pastoral poems, satires and epics written around the same time as the Infancy Gospel of James. As the persecution of Christians ended with the reign of Emperor Constantine I in the early 4th century, Purity came to replace martyrdom as the paramount Christian virtue. Mary's virginity, as expressed in the Infancy Gospel of James, made her the ultimate embodiment of purity. The Immaculate Conception and birth of Jesus began to take its place alongside his teachings, crucifixion and resurrection as events important to Christian worship. This was reflected not only in Jerome's writings supporting the perpetual virginity of Mary, but also in the sects, SECTS, devoted to venerating Mary that began to spring up in the Eastern Roman Empire. The pivotal figure in the Going Mary movement was Pulcheria, the eldest daughter of Arcadius, Emperor of the East, for more than a century. The Roman Empire had been divided for strategic reasons into the Western Empire and Eastern Empire, ruled from Constantinople, known today as Istanbul, Turkey. The two halves were often ruled by different emperors, as was the case in Arcadius and Pulcheria's time. When Arcadius died in 408 AD, the throne passed to his son, Theodosius II, who was only 7 years old at the time. As his guardian and regent, Pulcheria became de facto ruler of the Empire of the East and assumed the title Empress. A devout Christian, Pulcheria dedicated life to honouring Mary, taking a vow of lifelong virginity and persuading her sisters to do the same. In the beginning, there may have been a pragmatic reason for this. She would otherwise have been compelled to wed and thereby relinquish her imperial power to her husband. Be that as it may, she took her vow seriously. She transformed the imperial palace into a virtual monastery for Mary worshippers. She instituted a virginity festival for all chaste women on December 26th. She also made Mary more visible in Constantinople by bringing various relics associated with her shroud, her belt, portrait of her painted by the evangelist Luke, to the capital for public display. So if Luke, this evangelist in Christ, or after Christ's time, or during Christ's time, whatever, painted her, why didn't he paint Jesus? A picture of Jesus? Probably because scripturally it wasn't something that he did, right? Or he wasn't to be a man of attention, right? You know, like that way. Images made of him, etc., etc. Okay, so the evangelist looked to the capital for public display. He painted it, right? She built 3 churches to house these relics and instituted weekly ceremonies to honour Mary. Pulcheria's ultimate act on behalf of Mary was calculated to exalt the Virgin throughout the empire. It took place in the context of a theological dispute that was sweeping the land. Some writers had called Mary by the title Theotokos, usually translated as Mother of God, as early as the 3rd century. But some Christians in Pulcheria's time, led by Nestorius, it's the one who had the debate with Cyril, and Cyril got all mad because he explained to him the hypostasis, that Christ was of 2 natures, both God and man. So this guy said, hey, he's a heretic, etc., etc. And the Apostolic Church of the East, which was founded by Thomas, etc., was supposedly said to have been influenced. He was their leader. He was the one that founded that church, all this sort of rubbish. They said, well, they basically said this because what he said to Cyril about the hypostasis, Christ being both divine or God and man, they said, yeah, well, we've been saying that for thousands of years prior to what Nestorius said. So they said, oh, you're a bunch of heretics because you basically agree with what he's saying. So that's why they were labelled with that name, Nestorius, the Nestorian Church. And everyone says, oh yeah, he founded it, when he didn't. So for centuries after centuries they've been having this name, oh you're Nestorians, the Nestorian Church, etc., etc. So they just ran with it eventually. Said, yep, okay. And in an interview that we came across, one of the head patriarchs said to this interviewer, look guy, if you keep calling us Nestorians, we're going to have to go to war. It's just being sarcastic, right? Bit of humour. Some Christians in Pulcherria's time, led by Nestorius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, objected to the title. No mortal creature, they said, could give birth to the divine, therefore recognising Mary as the Mother of God would be tantamount to declaring her a goddess. To resolve the issue, Pulcherria's brother, the now grown Emperor Theodosius, convened the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD. It was only the third time an ecumenical council had been held anywhere in Christendom. About 150 bishops from throughout the Christian world gathered in the hilltop city overlooking the Aegean Sea on the west coast of what is now Turkey. The choice of the site for the meeting was fitting because, according to legend, Mary had spent the last years of her life after Jesus' crucifixion in a small house in Ephesus. Pulcheria led those who were in favour of the church's officially recognising Mary as Theotokos, or the Mother of God. She succeeded in persuading the majority of the bishops to adopt her position, and Mary was officially recognised as Mother of God, in a decision that was binding throughout the Christian world. Bishop Nestorius was stripped of his title and banished, first to Antioch and finally to a remote monastery in Egypt. An order was issued to burn his books and writings wherever they might be found. One consequence of recognising Mary as the Mother of God was that it obligated the Christians everywhere to venerate her by holding festivals in her honour and dedicating churches to her. This meant preaching the story of Mary and portraying events in her life on church walls. As their source, Christians drew on the Infancy Gospel of James. September 8 was designated as the feast of the birth of the Virgin, as noted on page 19, and many manuscripts of the Infancy Gospel here bear the words for September 8. They must have been copied expressly to be read during the feast, notwithstanding Pope Gelasius' decree. The Secret Gospel. Devotion to Mary spread from the east to the west in the 7th century, beginning in 614 AD, when the Persians captured Jerusalem and many Christians fled to Rome, bringing their feasts and relics with them. Among the feasts were those celebrating the birth of Mary and the presentation of Mary in the temple, both of which had their basis in the Infancy Gospel of James. The story of Mary, as related in the Infancy Gospel, was kept alive through the Dark Ages in hymns and religious art. Mary has been the subject of more artworks than any other woman in history. Paintings, mosaics, and book illustrations depict events that were never mentioned in the New Testament but originated with the Infancy Gospel. The spread of Mary worship to the west meant that the Infancy Gospel, if translated into Latin, would have found a ready audience, but because the Gospel was prohibited by the Roman Church, some fancy footwork was required. The Infancy Gospel resurfaced in disguised form in the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. This book, which modern scholars date to the 7th or 8th century, got its title because it purported to have been written in Hebrew by the evangelist Matthew and later translated into Latin by St. Jerome, the very man who had rejected the original Infancy Gospel. The book incorporated much of the Infancy Gospel of James, though some parts were omitted and others were considerably expanded. Toward the end of the 9th century, another revised version of the Mary story appeared, the Book of the Birth of Mary. A largely reworked, shorter version of Pseudo-Matthew omitted elements of the Infancy Gospel that contradicted biblical accounts, while elaborating on new material that had been added to Pseudo-Matthew. Both revisions were relied upon by authors, historians and poets in the 10th through 12th centuries. Then around 1230, 3 Dominican monks used these revisions in composing books that would spread the Mary legend to a much wider audience. Jean de Maillet compiled Abbreviato in Gestus et Miraculous Sanctorum, a book of the lives of the saints designed to be used for sermon preparation. In that chapter devoted to Mary, he drew heavily on the Book of the Birth of Mary. In 1250, Barthélemy de Trent wrote a similar volume, Epilogus in Gesta Sanctorum, drawing on both the birth of Mary and pseudo-Matthew. Finally, about 1260, Jacobus de Voragine made use of both John de Mailly's and Barthélemy de Trent's book in writing his own book of the lives of the saints, Legenda Sanctorum, commonly known as the Golden Legend. It is through these Dominican works that Renaissance and Baroque artists learned of the life of Mary after Jesus' birth. The result was an explosion of religious art depicting events that originally appeared in the Infancy Gospel of James. Details of the Annunciation, such as Mary holding a spindle of purple thread and encountering the angel beside a well or a fountain, Joseph as an old man with a bald head, a grey beard and a walking stick, pictures of Mary's parents, and in Joachim, the miraculous conception of the birth of Mary, and Mary's childhood in the temple in Jerusalem. An immaculate conception. Miraculous conception, not immaculate. Where did we read that? Immaculate. When it was miraculous. Yeah, it definitely says miraculous, not immaculate. The influence on art of the Mary legend as originally set forth in the Infancy Gospel of James was remarkably widespread. An Armenian Bible from the late 13th century, for example, shows Mary holding the spindle of purple thread. A 14th century mosaic at the Chora monastery in Constantinople shows Mary standing at a fountain when the angel Gabriel greets her. In 1305, Mary was selected as the subject of a series of frescoes, murals painted on wet plaster so that the paint would not peel or wear away with time. Those frescoes would ultimately find a place among the most influential works in the history of art. The site of the paintings was a chapel that still stands today in Padua, Italy. It is known as the Arena Chapel because it was built where an ancient Roman amphitheatre had once stood, with the Capella degli Scrovigni after the man who built it. So that's that painter. Enrico Scrovigni was the son and heir of the obscenely wealthy Reginaldo Scrovigni, whose unscrupulous money-lending activities were so widely known that Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy named him specifically and consigned him to hell. The younger Scrovigni built the chapel for his family's use and dedicated it to St. Mary of Charity to redeem his father's soul and save his own. If you visit the Arena Chapel, you'll find the walls completely covered with 38 frescoes, arranged in 3 tiers, probably 3 layers, 3 levels. The murals are the works of Florentine painter and architect Giotto de Bondone, who is generally considered to be the father of Renaissance painting. He invented the technique of perspective, depicting 3-dimensional scenes on 2-dimensional surfaces. He reintroduced the naturalistic representation of humans and animals, which had been forgotten for centuries in Western art, and his paintings inspired such artists as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. Giotto's work can be seen in many of the great churches of Italy, including the Church of St. Francis at Assisi and the Vatican in Rome. But art historians agree that the fullest expression of his genius was a series of frescoes in the Arena Chapel. The top tier of the chapel's frescoes depicts events in the life of Mary, arranged in chronological order. The series begins as does the Infancy Gospel of James, with Joachim and Anne. One shows Joachim being expelled from the temple because he is childless, page 63. In another, Anne is being told by an angel that she will at last give birth to a child, page 70. In the next, Joachim receives the same angelic message, page 12. Then comes the couple's joyous embrace outside the Golden Gate of Jerusalem, page 37. The series goes on to depict Anne giving birth to Mary, page 19. Mary's presentation to the temple at age 3, page 77. An angel feeding Mary in the temple, priests praying over staffs to decide who will wed Mary, page 81, and her being given to Joseph, page 25. It is obvious that Giotto's work in the Arena Chapel was inspired, if not by the forbidden Infancy Gospel of James itself, by the Golden Legend or one of the other watered down versions edited by Dominican monks in the previous century. In fact, all 16 frescoes in the top tier depict events that originally appeared in the Infancy Gospel, and of those, only 3 relate to events mentioned in the New Testament Gospels. Like so many other aspects of Giotto's work, his extensive use of this subject matter inspired the Renaissance and Baroque artists that would come later, popularizing the Mary legend in religious paintings for the next 3 centuries. For instance, German painter Stefan Lochner's masterpiece The Marriage of the Virgin, now in a private collection, shows Joseph as an elderly man with a bald head and a long flowing white beard. Painted between 1505 and 1510, Venetian artist Giorgione's Adoration of the Shepherds also shows Joseph with a bald head and white beard. It can be seen today in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. In 1507, the great Italian Renaissance artist and poet Raphael painted the Canigiani Holy Family, page 40, now in the Alte Pinakothek Art Museum in Munich. The work shows Mary, Elizabeth and their children, Jesus and John the Baptist. The elderly Joseph looms over them, leaning on his staff with his eyes downcast so that the shiny bald head is his most prominent feature. Leonardo da Vinci's painting The Virgin and Child with St. Anne, created sometime between 1507 and 1530, hangs in Louvre in Paris today, page 10. Most Christians of Da Vinci's time would immediately recognise Anne, Mary's mother, in the background, even though Anne does not appear anywhere in the New Testament. The list of paintings goes on. Birth of Jesus by Giudicio Cozzarelli, another early 16th century painter, etc. etc. Okay, so that's a brief, or maybe longer brief, review of this book, the Infancy Gospel of James, and how it was banned, and how it talks about Mary and how she was venerated as the Mother of God. All these painters that painted these scenes, even though the book was banned, it was painted different buildings, etc. Why didn't they get in trouble for that? If the book was banned, or it's just meaning that it wasn't included in the canon. It was not allowed to be in there, not allowed to be read, all this sort of stuff, not allowed to be placed in the canon with the other accepted books of the Bible, whatever, right? Or it was just so beautiful that they didn't bother to persecute these people that painted that book upon the in different levels in these particular buildings. So if you like this, if it really inspired you, opened your eyes to this knowledge that you didn't have any idea of, as we didn't, then give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add your comments below the video, and then go share this particular video with all your family, friends, neighbours and others.